My daughter-in-law kicked me out. He's an extra mouth to feed, she said, while my son nodded. The move I made next changed everything. Hey Reddit, probably too old for this app, but I need to get this off my chest. Here's how my gold digger daughter-in-law underestimated me and regretted it. I'm Jacob, 68 male, and about a year ago I learned that raising a good son means jack squat when he marries a manipulator witch. Peter is 34, built like his old man, but with his mother's trusting heart, his fatal flaw. I spent 42 years married to Isabella, watching this brilliant woman slowly forget my face because of Alzheimer's. But I stayed right there, bathed her, fed her, read her the same romance novel 17 times because it made her smile. Isabella died 3 months after Peter married Fiona. That's when I started noticing changes in my son immediately after the funeral that had Fiona's fingerprints all over them. Over the next 3 months, Peter's concern calls started. 6 months after Isabella passed, I agreed to move in temporarily. The hospital scare hit a few weeks before that. See, Peter had always been independent. Kid moved out at 22, built his own IT career, never asked for money unless he needed it. But suddenly, 3 months after we buried Isabella, I'm getting weird calls where he's asking about my long-term plans and financial implications of aging in place. The first red flag was when Peter showed up to help clean out Isabella's things, with a checklist. Not a natural, what should we keep conversation, but an actual printed spreadsheet with categories. Sentimental value, resale potential, storage requirements, disposal method. Did you make this? I asked, holding up the paper. His face went red. Fiona thought it would help us stay organized. She's good with this kind of stuff. That's when I knew. Suddenly he's concerned about my property taxes, my outdated security system, and whether I should consolidate my bank accounts. Every conversation felt scripted, and whenever I pushed back, he'd get defensive. The breaking point came when I had a cardiac event. My heart skipped beats and made me dizzy enough to fall in my kitchen. Mrs. Miller next door heard the crash and called an ambulance. Nothing serious, medication adjustments, and I was fine. But when Peter got the hospital call, he showed up genuinely scared, asking doctors real questions. Then Fiona walked in carrying a leather portfolio, like she was attending a board meeting. "How is he?" she asked Peter, not me. "I'm fine," I said. "Just some medication issues." Fiona nodded at me politely, then immediately turned back to Peter. "We should probably discuss next steps while we're all here." Next steps? I was getting discharged in 2 hours. That's when she opened the portfolio and started laying out brochures for medical alert systems, meal delivery services, and senior companion services. All professionally researched and completely presumptuous. "Fiona," I said, "I appreciate the concern, but I'm not an invalid." I fell down. "I know, but that's exactly why we can't just ignore this. What if Mrs. Miller hadn't been there?" Peter was nodding along, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. This was his wife being practical, but it was also his father being treated like a problem to be solved. "We've been talking about some stuff, and maybe it's time to think about making some changes." I looked at my son, this kid I'd taught to fish, to drive stick shift, to change his own oil, and realized this woman had been playing a longer game than I'd understood. "What kind of changes?" I asked. That's when she pulled out the big guns. Assisted living brochures. 5 different facilities, all within an hour of their place, complete with cost analyses and waitlist information. She'd done her homework, and Peter was looking at those brochures like he was seeing them for the first time. But here's what really got me. She'd calculated my finances, down to the penny. My pension, social security, savings, house value, everything. She knew exactly what I could afford, and for how long. "How did you get this information?" Her smile got tighter. Peter provided the basic information. We wanted to make sure any decisions were realistic. I looked at Peter, and he looked ashamed. "Dad, I just wanted to understand the options." "So you gave my personal financial information to your wife without asking me?" The silence was deafening. He started to say something, but Fiona cut him off. "We're family, Jacob. Peter's just looking out for you?" "Right. The kind of family that shows up to your medical emergency with a dang business plan." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with normal in-law drama. Fiona was conducting a systematic campaign to reposition me from father to liability, and she was using my son's love for me as the weapon to do it. But what she didn't know was that this old man had been dealing with manipulative people since before she was born. And I was about to remind everyone exactly who raised the kid she was trying to manage. 6 months after Isabella's death, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I agreed to move in with them, temporarily, while we explored long-term options. Fiona had finally worn Peter down with her constant anxiety about my living alone, and Peter had worn me down with his genuine concern disguised as his wife's talking points. Their condo was like living inside a Pinterest board, designed for two people who valued aesthetics over human comfort. My bedroom was their home office. Not your room or the spare room, but the office where you'll be staying. Her yoga equipment and filing cabinets remained exactly where they were, forcing me to navigate around her territorial markers. The first week was all fake smiles and, "We're so happy you're here." Nonsense. But by week 2, the mask started slipping. It started with the shower schedule. Fiona posted a laminated calendar showing optimal times for everyone to use the facilities. My slot was 5:30 to 6 a.m. Then came kitchen rules. Coffee was made fresh each morning, but only for 2 people. If I wanted coffee after 7 a.m., I needed to make my own pot, but only after their breakfast dishes were cleaned. My food got labeled with my name, but her manipulation got masterful. She never complained directly. Instead, she made observations. Standing in the hallway after my shower. Interesting. The hot water ran out during my turn again. Peter would hear these comments and start asking me to be more mindful of resources, thinking he was helping. The breaking point came during week 3. I was watching the news when she came home from work. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, staring at me like I was sitting in her throne. "Jacob, I know you're comfortable, but Peter and I usually decompress together when we get home. Maybe you could find something to do in your room?" My room. Like I was a teenager. I looked at Peter, who was standing behind his wife looking miserable. "That's okay with you, son." Peter's eyes darted between Fiona and me. "Dad, maybe just for tonight?" So I went to my room, where I could hear them talking through thin walls. Not talking. Fiona was briefing Peter on my behavior. How I'd used too much cream cheese, left water spots on the mirror, moved her yoga mat 6 inches to plug in my phone charger. "He's not adjusting well to structure," Fiona said. "Maybe we need another conversation about expectations." She was building a case. Every minor inconvenience was being cataloged as evidence that I was a burden they couldn't manage. But 2 can play that game. The next morning, I started my own documentation. I bought a notebook and began recording Fiona's behavior with the same clinical detachment she used on me. If she wanted to treat this like a business arrangement, I'd approach it like the businessman I'd been for 40 years. Fiona's morning yoga, 5 a.m. to 5:45 a.m., music loud enough to wake the dead. Fiona's phone calls with her mother, 6:30 to 7:15 p.m., outside my door, discussing my difficult adjustment. Her meal prep, elaborate, expensive ingredients I couldn't eat due to blood pressure medication, followed by passive-aggressive comments. But the real revelation came when I caught her photographing my stuff. I walked into the kitchen and found her taking pictures of my coffee mug in the sink, the newspaper folded incorrectly, and my reading glasses on the side table. "What are you doing?" "Oh," she startled. "I'm just documenting organization ideas for our Instagram. Before and after shots of our space optimization." Right. That night, Peter came home looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Fiona immediately launched into her daily report. But I was ready. "Peter," I interrupted, "can I talk to you?" "Alone?" Fiona's head snapped toward me. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just want to catch up with my son." "Outside," I clarified. Peter looked nervous but followed me onto their tiny balcony. The city noise gave us privacy, and for the first time in weeks, my son's shoulders relaxed. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "I'm fine, Dad. Just adjusting to everything." "Your wife seems stressed." His face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on exhaustion. "Look, Fiona's she's a planner, you know? She likes everything organized, and having you here has been, well, it's been an adjustment for all of us." "Is that what she told you?" "Dad, don't do that. Don't make this about Fiona. We're all trying to make this work." There it was again. My son couldn't even have a conversation about his own feelings without including his wife's opinion. "Peter, when's the last time you made a decision without consulting her first?" His face went red. "That's not fair. Marriage is about making decisions together. I'm not talking about buying a house. I'm talking about whether you can have a conversation with your father without permission." He stared at me for a long moment. He was starting to realize, but admitting that meant acknowledging his wife wasn't who he thought she was. "She's been good to me, Dad. She takes care of everything, handles all the planning, and manages our finances. I don't know what I'd do without her." "You'd make your own decisions, like you did for the first 32 years of your life." That's when she opened the sliding door. "Is everything okay out here?" You both look so serious. Peter immediately shifted into husband mode. "We're fine, just talking." "Good," Fiona smiled, but her eyes were cold. "Dinner's ready." I made that salmon dish you love, Peter. Of course she did. Right on cue, she was reminding my son of all the ways she took care of him, making it harder for him to see how she was isolating him from his family. As we walked back inside, she put her hand on Peter's arm and whispered something that made him nod quickly. Then she looked at me with that same expression I'd seen the day she showed up at the hospital with her dang portfolio. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with polite negotiations and family meetings. This woman had declared war on me the day I moved in, and she'd been winning every battle by controlling the field. But wars aren't won by battles. They're won by strategy. Month 2 was when Fiona really started turning the screws. She'd figured out that direct confrontation made her look bad to Peter, so she launched a psychological pressure campaign, Thermostat Wars. She locked it at 68 and scolded any change. She started inviting people over during my TV time, business networking events for her marketing firm, 20-something co-workers treating their living room like a coffee shop, talking about synergy while I sat in my corner like mismatched furniture. "Sorry, Jacob," Fiona would announce to the room. "My father-in-law is staying with us temporarily while we figure out his long-term care situation." But the worst part? How she managed Peter's relationship with me. She began scheduling date nights during the times Peter and I usually talked. Suddenly, my son was too busy for Saturday morning coffee. Sunday phone calls got interrupted because she had planned surprise day trips. That's when I decided to conduct an experiment. I started leaving subtle traps to test her surveillance. I'd leave my notebook open to pages about property management investments. Fictional, but detailed enough to look real. Within days, Fiona was asking Peter about my new business ventures and whether I was making risky financial decisions. Every personal detail I shared was being filtered and turned into evidence that I couldn't be trusted. The breaking point came when Frank stopped by unannounced on a Wednesday evening. Frank had been my construction supervisor for 15 years, and my friend for 20. Good guy, straight shooter. "Jacob!" Frank boomed when Peter opened the door. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." Peter looked nervous. "Dad didn't mention you were coming by." "Didn't know I needed permission to visit an old friend," Frank said, walking past Peter. Fiona emerged from the kitchen wearing that tight smile that meant trouble. "Frank, right? I'm Fiona, Peter's wife." Frank shook her hand, but I could see him sizing her up. "Nice place you got here," he said, looking around. "We like to keep things organized," Fiona replied. "Coffee?" "Yeah, sure." While Fiona was in the kitchen, he leaned over and whispered, "This place feels like a doctor's office." "How are you holding up?" "Getting by. Adjusting." He nodded, understanding exactly what I was adjusting to. When Fiona returned with water, she sat down and immediately began an interrogation. "So, Frank, how long have you known Jacob? What kind of work did you do together? Are you retired?" Frank answered politely, but I could see him getting annoyed. When Fiona started asking about his support system and long-term care needs, Frank's patience ran out. "Lady, I'm 66 years old. I own 3 rental properties, and I got 2 kids who actually like having me around. I think I'm pretty well handled." Her smile faltered. "Of course, I didn't mean to imply." And Jacob here is one of the sharpest guys I know. Managed crews for 30 years, raised a good son, took care of his wife through Alzheimer's without complaining. If he needs help, he'll ask. Until then, maybe let the man live his life. The silence was deafening. Peter looked like he wanted to crawl under the furniture. Fiona's face went through 6 different shades of red. "We're just worried about you being safe," Fiona said. "Worried about him being safe or worried about his bank account?" Frank asked bluntly. Peter finally spoke up. "Frank, I think you should go." Frank looked at me and I nodded. No point making things worse for Peter. "Sure thing. Jacob, let's grab lunch this weekend. Somewhere we can actually get decent coffee." After Frank left, the temperature in that condo dropped 20 degrees. That night, I heard them fighting through the walls. Fiona was demanding Peter set boundaries with me about inappropriate guests. Peter was trying to explain that Frank was just being protective, but she wasn't having it. "Your father is turning people against me," she hissed. "Can't you see what he's doing?" "Maybe Frank has a point," Peter said quietly. "Maybe we're being too controlling." Fiona's voice went up an octave. "Peter, your father nearly had a heart attack 6 months ago. He's living in a house that's too big, with no support system, making risky decisions. We're being responsible." There it was, her entire strategy. Now I knew exactly what she was afraid of. Losing control of the narrative. 3 months into my stay, the pressure had reached critical mass. Peter looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks, jumping between his wife's demands and his concern for me. Fiona had ramped up her campaign to North Korean propaganda levels. The final straw began on a Tuesday when Fiona announced they needed a family financial planning meeting. She'd prepared a presentation, slides printed out, color-coded charts, and a 3-ring binder labeled Jacob Mackenzie, Long-Term Care Strategic Planning. Good grief. Peter looked like he was heading to his execution as we sat at their glass dining table. Fiona opened her binder. As we've discussed, the current living arrangement was always temporary, while we evaluated options, Fiona began. Now that we've had 3 months to assess Jacob's needs and capabilities, we're ready to make concrete decisions about the next phase. She flipped to her first chart, a financial analysis breaking down every penny of my income, expenses, and assets. Not estimates, exact figures. How did you get these numbers? Fiona smiled. Peter provided the basic framework, and I did research to fill in the gaps. The good news is that your financial position is strong enough to afford high-quality care options. She flipped to Facility Comparison Matrix, 5 different assisted living places with ratings for medical care, social activities, meals, and costs. Peter was nodding along like this was reasonable. Golden Sunset Manor scored highest in our evaluation, Fiona announced, pulling out glossy brochures. Excellent medical facilities, 3-to-1 staff-to-resident ratio, memory care unit. I didn't have memory problems, but she was already planning for my cognitive decline. Monthly cost is $4,200, but that includes meals, housekeeping, medication management, and activities. Based on Jacob's assets, he can afford this for 8 to 12 years, depending on market conditions. Peter finally spoke up. Fiona, don't you think we should discuss this with Dad first before making recommendations? We are discussing it with him. That's what this meeting is about. I mean, shouldn't we ask what he wants instead of telling him what we think is best? Her smile got tighter. Peter, sometimes what people want and what's best for them aren't the same thing. Jacob might want to stay in his house, but that doesn't mean it's safe. What if I don't want to go to Golden Sunset Manor? She flipped to another page. Here are 4 alternatives, each with different amenities and price points. We can visit all of them this weekend. And if I don't want assisted living at all? Her patience was cracking. Jacob, I understand this is difficult, but we have to be realistic. You're almost 70. You have documented health issues, and maintaining independence becomes challenging as we age. My documented health issues consist of blood pressure medication and reading glasses, and a cardiac episode that required emergency intervention, plus arthritis severe enough to affect mobility and balance issues that caused you to fall. Every minor health issue cataloged and weaponized to support her argument that I couldn't manage my own life. Peter was looking between us. Maybe we could look at in-home care options? Or senior communities where Dad could have his own apartment, but with medical support. Her mask slipped. Peter, we've been through this. In-home care is extremely expensive and difficult to manage. Then she dropped the bomb. Look, this whole thing just isn't working out long-term, Fiona continued, her voice getting clinical. Peter's career requires a dedicated home office, and honestly, having an extra mouth to feed is putting a strain on our budget that we didn't anticipate. Silence. The words hit like a physical slap. Peter's head snapped toward his wife like she'd announced she was joining ISIS. The color drained from his face as he realized what his wife had just called his father. Fiona, Peter said slowly, what did you just say? Peter, we agreed we needed to be honest about the financial impact. Your father is a grown man who can handle hearing the truth. The truth? I kept my voice level, but inside I was calculating exactly how I was going to destroy this woman's life. And what truth is that? I'm talking about real life, Peter. Having another person here costs money. Groceries, utilities, wear and tear on the apartment, plus we can't even use our office anymore. It all adds up. It's just not working. Fiona, Peter said, his voice getting stronger, are you seriously calling my dad a financial burden? I'm talking about reality, Peter. We've provided Jacob with temporary housing while he figured out his next steps, but now it's time to make those next steps. She pulled out more papers. Golden Sunset Manor's admission paperwork, already filled out with my personal information. Financial authorization forms, giving Peter power of attorney over my medical decisions. A living will template, optimized for efficient end-of-life care management. None of it meant anything without my signature. She'd pre-filled admission forms and brought blank POA/living will templates, like my signature was a checkbox. This woman had been planning my institutional warehousing since the day I moved in, maybe since Isabella died. But she didn't know that her old man had been dealing with people like her since she was in diapers. I was about to give her a masterclass in what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Fiona, I said, standing up from the table, I want to thank you. This was very enlightening. So you'll consider our recommendations? she asked, hope creeping into her voice. Oh, sure, I'll do more than consider them. I smiled. Peter looked confused, but Fiona grinned. She thought she'd won. The poor woman had no idea the war was just getting started. The morning after Fiona's presentation from hell, I got up at 5 a.m. and started making phone calls. Time to remind everyone that this 68-year-old extra mouth to feed had been handling difficult situations since before his daughter-in-law learned to walk. The first call was to Frank, who answered on the second ring. Jacob? Everything all right? Frank, remember that conversation about rental properties and property management? I'm ready to have that discussion. Hot darn. What changed? I gave him the 5-minute version of Fiona's strategic planning meeting, and I could hear him getting angrier with every detail. That manipulative little snake, Frank growled. She's been planning this since day one, hasn't she? Oh, it gets better. She's already filled out the admission paperwork for the nursing home. Had my finances calculated down to the penny without my permission? Good grief. What do you need from me? A place to live and work where people treat me like a human being. Frank had a 1-bedroom apartment available immediately. Good building, decent neighborhood, and the property management job was still open. Part-time work, real responsibilities, enough pay to supplement my pension while keeping me busy and useful. When do you want to see it? This afternoon? Can you pick me up? Heck yes! The second call was to Jim Whitman, my lawyer. Jim had handled Isabella's estate, knew my financial situation better than anyone, and had zero patience for family manipulation. Jim, I need to make some major changes to my will, and I need them done this week. What kind of changes? The kind where people who call their father-in-law an extra mouth to feed don't get to retire on his money. Long pause. Jacob, are you sure about this? Estate planning decisions made in anger sometimes. Yes, I am sure. The third call was to Carl at the bank where I'd kept my accounts for 30 years. Carl, I need you to be straight with me. Has anyone been asking questions about my accounts? Jacob, I probably shouldn't. Someone has detailed information about my finances that they shouldn't have. If there's been a privacy breach, I need to know. Silence, then a sigh. About 6 months ago, your son came in with his wife. She did most of the talking, said they were helping you manage your affairs. She requested detailed statements going back 2 years, account balances, transaction histories, everything. And you gave her this information? Peter signed the request form. He's your emergency contact, and she said you'd authorize the review. Of course she did. Carl, I want new account numbers, new access codes, and I want Peter's emergency contact status changed to notification only. No access to any information without my authorization. Peter had signed an information release 6 months back. I revoked it, changed every account number, and set him to notification only. No access without my written authorization. By 3 p.m., Frank was knocking on the door with a crap-eating grin and truck keys. Ready for the grand tour? I grabbed my jacket and notebook. Let's go see what real independence looks like. Fiona appeared immediately, wearing that fake smile. Jacob, where are you going? I thought we could spend the afternoon reviewing the assisted living brochures. Change of plans, Fiona. Frank's showing me some options that might be more suitable. Her smile faltered. What kind of options? Independent living options. For independent people. The apartment Frank showed me was perfect. Clean, comfortable, and in a building full of kind people. Mrs. Wang from next door had already baked extra soup when she heard someone new might be moving in. When do you want to move in? This weekend. When I got back to the condo, Peter was home early, and Fiona was pacing like a caged animal. Dad, where were you? Peter asked. Fiona said you left with Frank. Looking at apartments. Fiona's face went white. Apartments? Jacob, we agreed you were going to consider the assisted living facilities. No, you decided I was going to consider them. I never agreed to anything. Peter looked between us, clearly trying to process what was happening. Dad, are you sure you're ready to live alone again? I mean, after what happened? What happened, Peter, was that I fell down in my kitchen because my medication made me dizzy. That's not a reason to institutionalize someone. Silence. You know what I learned today? There are plenty of options between living in my own house and being warehoused in some sterile facility where they manage my medication and monitor my bathroom breaks. Peter sat down. Dad, I'm so confused. Yesterday, you seemed okay with looking at our ideas. Yesterday, I was still trying to make this work. Today, I realized that some situations can't be fixed. Fiona's control was slipping fast. This is nuts. You're almost 70, you've got health problems, and you're making crazy decisions because your feelings got hurt instead of thinking practically. That's when I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the pages where I'd been documenting everything. Fiona, over the past 30 days, You have photographed my personal belongings as evidence of untidiness, scheduled family activities to prevent me from spending time with Peter, researched my financial information without my permission, and conducted surveillance on my personal conversations to use against me. Peter's mouth fell open. Dad, what are you talking about? I read him a few direct quotes from my notes, complete with dates and times. And yesterday, your wife presented a comprehensive plan for my institutionalization that included financial projections for my death timeline and admission paperwork she'd already filled out without my knowledge. Peter stared at Fiona like he was seeing her for the first time. Fiona, is this true? That night, Peter checked our shared Google Calendar and found every Saturday coffee with me auto-blocked for couple time. Then he found an email where Fiona had submitted my personal info to 2 facilities to hold a spot. That flipped the switch. Peter, your father is manipulating the situation to make me look like the villain. But someone had to make the hard decisions you were too emotional to make. Hard decisions? Like calling my father an extra mouth to feed? Like facing the fact that supporting another adult indefinitely isn't sustainable for our marriage or our future. There it was, her real concern. Speaking of financial sustainability, I said, pulling out my phone. I spent some time today reviewing my own long-term financial planning. Her eyes locked onto my phone like it was a weapon. I called my lawyer this afternoon and made some significant changes to my will. The silence was deafening. Fiona's expression was pure panic. What kind of changes? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. The kind where people who see their father-in-law as an extra mouth to feed don't get to retire on his money. What follows? Oh, it was beautiful. Peter filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Yup, kid finally grew a spine. Watching Fiona's carefully constructed life implode was more satisfying than I'd expected. The woman who'd spent months manipulating my son discovered what happens when the mask finally comes off. The first sign Fiona was losing it came when she started showing up at my apartment building. She'd corner other tenants in the lobby, asking about my mental state, whether I seemed confused, if I was managing medications properly. Mrs. Wang, who'd become my unofficial building grandmother, shut that mess down immediately. Young lady, Jacob is sharper than most people half his age. He helps me with my computer, fixes things around the building, and makes great coffee. If you're worried about someone's mental health, maybe look in a mirror. But Fiona was just getting started. She began calling Peter's friends, his coworkers, anyone who'd listen, claiming I was a manipulative old man who was destroying her marriage out of spite. She had a whole narrative about how I was jealous of their relationship and couldn't stand that Peter had chosen her over his father. The problem with that story was that everyone who actually knew Peter could see what Fiona's care had done to him. His co-workers told him he looked like he'd aged 5 years and 6 months. His friends said he'd become anxious and indecisive. Peter started coming by my apartment every Saturday for our old tradition of grilling burgers and talking about everything except his imploding marriage. It took 3 weeks before he was ready to admit what he'd been living through. Dad, I don't know how I let it get so bad, he said, staring at his bottle. Fiona convinced me that managing your life was the same thing as caring about you. Son, there's a difference between being concerned and being controlling. I keep thinking about all the times she spoke for me, made decisions for me. When did I stop being able to think for myself? The divorce proceedings were a mess that revealed exactly how deep her manipulation went. She'd been monitoring Peter's spending, limiting his social activities, and gradually isolating him from anyone who might question her influence. When her lawyer demanded half of everything, including Peter's future inheritance from me, it became clear that this had always been about money. Her lawyer actually argued that she deserved compensation for the emotional labor of caring for me, and that my decision to change my will constituted elder abuse designed to punish her for being a responsible daughter-in-law. Jim, who'd been practicing law for 40 years, told the judge he'd never seen someone try to claim inheritance rights for a person who was still alive and mentally competent. But the real entertainment started when she began her public meltdown. She created social media accounts dedicated to exposing the truth about manipulative elderly men who destroy families. She posted photos of my apartment building with captions about seniors who abandon their responsibilities. Frank found that first and called me laughing so hard he could barely speak. Jacob, you've got to see this. She's been posting that you brainwashed Peter. She had rewritten the entire story to make herself the victim of my psychological warfare campaign. She claimed I deliberately had a heart episode to gain sympathy, moved in with them specifically to destroy their marriage, and changed my will as the ultimate act of narcissistic revenge. But here's where the desperation made her stupid. She included enough specific details to make her posts legally actionable. She named Peter's workplace, described our apartment building, and made claims about my mental health that qualified as defamation. Jim was practically rubbing his hands together when I showed him. Jacob, she's handed us everything we need for a restraining order and a defamation lawsuit. This woman has documented her own harassment campaign. The restraining order hearing was when Fiona finally showed everyone who she really was. She showed up with a folder full of evidence, photos of me at the grocery store, proving I was stalking her, screenshots of Peter visiting my apartment, proving I was manipulating him, and what she called medical records, which were just discharge instructions Peter had forwarded her plus notes she'd snapped off my fridge. When the judge asked how she'd obtained these, she claimed she had a right to protect herself from a dangerous individual. "Ma'am," the judge said, "you're describing normal activities. What exactly are you afraid of?" The judge granted a temporary restraining order on the spot, but the final meltdown was still to come. The night after the hearing, she showed up at my apartment building intoxicated and screaming. She'd been sitting in her car for hours, working up the courage to confront me directly. "Where is he?" Fiona yelled from the parking lot. "Where's the old bastard who destroyed my life?" I was on my balcony grilling dinner when I heard the commotion. Peter was there too. We'd started having Saturday cookouts that reminded us both what normal family relationships felt like. "Jacob, get down here. You think you're so smart." Peter sighed and started toward the door, but I stopped him. "Let me handle this." I walked down to the parking lot where Fiona was screaming at the building like she was auditioning for a reality show. She looked like shit. "You manipulative piece of work!" Fiona screamed when she saw me. "You turned my own husband against me. You destroyed everything I worked for. Fiona, you're violating a restraining order. You need to leave." "Screw the restraining order. You think you can hide behind legal papers? You destroyed my marriage, stole my future, and made everyone think I'm the crazy one." A crowd was gathering. Neighbors, passersby, people with phones out recording this breakdown. Peter appeared at my shoulder, his face grim. "Fiona, go home." "Home?" She was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. "I don't have a home anymore. Your precious daddy made sure of that." "No," Peter said, his voice steady and strong. "You destroyed our home when you tried to make me choose between my wife and my father by treating him like garbage. Dad didn't turn me against you, Fiona. You did that yourself when you showed me who you really are." That's when she lost it completely. She started screaming about lawyers and lawsuits and having me committed. She threw her purse at Peter, called me every name in the book, and when Mrs. Wang tried to calm her down, Fiona shoved the 74-year-old woman to the ground. "Big mistake." "That's assault," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. "And I've got about 20 witnesses." The cops arrived 15 minutes later. Fiona was still screaming about her rights and how she was the victim when they put her in handcuffs. As they loaded her into the patrol car, she looked at me through the window with pure hatred. "This isn't over, you son of a witch!" "Yeah," I called back, "it really is." She'd just violated the RO, and after she shoved Mrs. Wang, the DA offered a plea: 30 days in county, 5 months suspended, 1 year probation, mandatory counseling. 2 years later, Peter and I have the best relationship we've had since he was a kid. He's dating a new woman named Sarah, who's actually impressed that he takes care of his father instead of seeing it as a burden. When she first heard about the Fiona situation, her response was, "Thank goodness you figured out what kind of person she was before you had kids with her." She's right. Peter learned some hard lessons about letting someone else control his moral compass. He came to me about 6 months after the divorce, looking more like his old self than I'd seen in years. "Dad, I need to apologize for everything. I forgot who raised me and what you taught me about loyalty. Son, you were manipulated by a professional. The important thing is that you recognized it and got out. But I almost threw you away because she made it seem financially responsible. How did I get so lost? Because you loved someone who used that love as a weapon against you. That's what manipulators do." Fiona, meanwhile, moved back in with her parents after serving 6 months for stalking and assault charges. Her social media accounts got suspended for harassment, and Jim sent a cease and desist over her posts. When she tried a flimsy defamation claim, the judge dismissed it with prejudice. The real victory isn't that Fiona got what she deserved, though watching her lose everything she thought she'd manipulated her way into was pretty satisfying. The real victory is that my son came back to his senses and dodged this nuclear bomb. Last Saturday, while we were grilling burgers, he asked me something that made me realize how much he'd grown from this experience. "Dad, how did you know Fiona was manipulating me when I couldn't see it myself?" "Because manipulation works by making victims feel like they're making their own decisions. Fiona never told you to choose her over me. She just created situations where choosing her felt like the responsible thing to do." Peter was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad I didn't lose you, Dad. Though I don't deserve forgiveness. I put my hand on his shoulder. Yes, you do, son. Some lessons take time, but it's better to learn than never. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.